The city stirred under a dawn sky streaked with amber and ash, its pulse a raw, uneven thrum. Car horns clashed in sharp, impatient bursts, vendors bellowed over sizzling grills, their voices tangling with the clatter of crates and coins. Sirens wove a faint, mournful thread through the morning's clamor, a distant cry swallowed by the roar of 7th Street. Glass towers loomed, their mirrored faces catching the sun's first rays, casting jagged shadows across cracked sidewalks where delivery bikes darted through crowds clutching steaming coffee cups and half-read newspapers. Amid this urban storm, Jamal Carter moved with a quiet grace, his presence a calm anchor in the chaos, like a lighthouse standing firm against a raging tide. At 36, he carried an effortless authority, his tailored navy suit crisp against his dark skin, the fabric catching the light with each step. His polished brogues tapped a steady rhythm against the pavement, a metronome of purpose. A civil rights attorney whose name echoed in courtrooms from Ohio to D.C., Jamal had dismantled corrupt systems, sheriffs caught rigging jails, corporations hiding bribes, city halls burying truth, with a precision that left power trembling in its boots. Yet his warm brown eyes held a softness, a half-smile hinting at a man who still saw hope in broken places, who believed justice could rise from ashes. He'd just stepped out of Mama Rosa's diner, a weathered gem tucked between a pawn shop with barred windows and a laundromat humming with off-key dryers, its neon open sign buzzing like a heartbeat against the gray dawn. Inside, the air was thick with bacon grease and laughter, the counter scarred by decades of elbows, spilled coffee, and whispered secrets. Rosa, 62, with a grin that could cut through fog and a voice roughened by years of shouting orders, treated Jamal like kin, her eyes crinkling when she saw him. "Saving the world today, Carter," she teased, sliding his plate across the counter, poached eggs, rye toast, black coffee, no sugar, just the way he liked it. He'd chuckled, leaning on the counter, his tie loosened slightly, tossing back, one case at a time, "Rosa. Gotta start somewhere." They'd swapped tales over the clink of dishes, her grandson's science fair win, a mural tagged with gang signs down the block, the new barista who kept burning the espresso. Jamal listened, nodding, his laugh low and warm, grounding her stories in a world that often felt unsteady. He paid with a 20 for a $10 tab, slipping the bill under his plate with a wink, his quiet way of giving back to a place that fed more than his hunger. Now, crossing 7th Street toward his sleek black SUV, its chrome glinting faintly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister, Nia, popped up on the cracked screen, "Barbecue Saturday. Potato salad or I'm disowning you. Don't test me." Jamal grinned, his thumbs quick, "Deal. Save me some ribs, troublemaker." He slid the phone into his jacket, blind to the eyes tracking him from the crowd, sharp and cold as steel, waiting for their moment. 2 police officers carved through the morning throng, their boots scuffing the pavement with a menace that parted pedestrians like water. Officer Malone, lean and wiry, led with a scowl etched deep into his narrow face, his pale eyes glinting like flint under the brim of his cap. Officer Harris, broader, with a boxer's build and skin like polished oak, followed close, his hand resting near his holster, fingers twitching faintly, betraying a tension his stone face hid. Their gazes pinned Jamal, stripping him to a silhouette in their minds, black, male, target, nothing more. "Excuse me, sir," Malone called, his voice a blade slicing through the street's hum, sharp enough to freeze a dog walker mid-stride, her poodle yipping in confusion. "We need your ID." Jamal halted, his fingers brushing the SUV's door handle, the moment crystallizing like ice under pressure. His father's lessons surged through him. "Stay calm, keep your hands visible, don't give them a reason," words carved into his bones since he was 12, stopped looking suspicious, while riding his bike on his own block, the cop's grip bruising his arm for no crime but youth. As a black man, Jamal knew these encounters could turn deadly on a whim, a wrong glance, a raised tone, a breath too sharp. "May I ask why, officer?" he said, his voice steady as granite, his eyes locking with Malone's, hands deliberately open, palms up, every movement calculated to signal compliance, not defiance. Malone's lip curled, irritation sparking like a live wire in his gaze, a man unaccustomed to questions. "Just show the ID. Now." His tone was a whip, meant to sting, to cow. Harris stepped closer, his bulk a wall of muscle, his fingers grazing the holster's grip, a silent threat that hung heavy in the air. Jamal exhaled slowly, his mind racing through options, rights he could assert, risks he couldn't afford to take. Innocence was no armor here. He'd seen too many clients, too many families, learn that lesson in courtrooms, in morgues. "All right," he said, his voice calm, measured, moving with glacial care to retrieve his wallet from his jacket, every gesture telegraphed to avoid a flinch, a misstep. He handed over his driver's license, the plastic gleaming faintly, and added, "I'd still like to know why I'm being stopped." Malone snatched the ID, his smirk sharp and joyless, a predator toying with prey before the kill. "What are you doing here?" he asked, sidestepping Jamal's question, his eyes flicking over the license with feigned disinterest. Harris loomed, his shadow swallowing the pavement, his silence heavier than words, a storm waiting to break. "I'm heading to my car after breakfast," Jamal replied, nodding toward the diner's glowing sign, its warmth a stark rebuke to the officer's chill, a beacon of normalcy in a moment twisting wrong. "Is there a problem?" Malone's smirk widened, baring teeth like a wolf scenting blood. "We've had reports of suspicious activity. You fit the description." The words landed like a fist, worn but bruising, a script Jamal knew by heart from years in court, from stories whispered at barbershops, from his own life. Fit the description. Code for black, male, existing, breathing where someone decided he shouldn't. He'd heard it at 16, slammed against a squad car matching a report, at 22 walking home from law school, at 30 defending a client whose only crime was a hoodie and a late-night stroll. "I'm a lawyer," he said, his voice level, deliberate, hoping to shift the ground beneath them, to force a pause, a rethink. "I've got a meeting in an hour. Can we clear this up?" Harris snorted, his voice low and mean, like gravel crunching underfoot. "Lawyer, huh? Fancy suit don't mean you're clean. Step away from the car." Jamal's pulse spiked, a drumbeat echoing in his chest, but his face stayed neutral, his voice a calm anchor in the rising storm. "I'm complying," he said, raising his hand slightly, palms out, moving slow as molasses to show he was no threat, his eyes never leaving Malone's. Before he could step back fully, Malone lunged, seizing his arm and twisting it with a vicious snap that sent pain searing through Jamal's shoulder, a white-hot blade cutting deep into muscle and nerve. Harris joined in, shoving him to the pavement with a force that stole his breath, his knee grinding into Jamal's back like a millstone. Jamal's cheeks scraped the gritty sidewalk, tasting dust and a coppery hint of blood as handcuffs snapped cold around his wrists, biting into his skin with a cruelty that felt personal. "You're under arrest for resisting," Malone barked, his voice cold, triumphant, laced with a glee that turned Jamal's stomach, though he hadn't twitched, hadn't fought, hadn't given them a shred of resistance to justify the charge. "What are you doing?" Jamal gasped, his voice strained but clear, the pain sharpening his focus, keeping him grounded against the chaos threatening to swallow him. "I didn't resist." The officers ignored him, yanking him upright, their grips bruising, their faces set with a grim satisfaction, as if they'd won a prize no one else could see. The street around them erupted into chaos, a spark igniting dry tinder. Mrs. Lena Brooks, 72, leaned from her stoop above the pawn shop, her voice cracking with righteous fury, her hands trembling as she gripped the railing. "Leave that boy be. He's a good man, helps my grandbaby with his homework every damn week." Mia Torres, a jogger in neon leggings, froze mid-stride, her phone already out, recording the scene with trembling hands, her breath hitching as she narrated softly. "This is absolute bullshit," she hissed, posting the video live to her socials, her caption raw and urgent. "Cops harassing an innocent man on 7th St. Spread this now." A crowd swelled, delivery drivers pausing their bikes, clerks stepping out from shops, kids clutching backpacks, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and anger, rippling through the street like a wave-gathering force. As Malone and Harris dragged Jamal toward their cruiser, its lights flashing red and blue like a warning no one heeded, he caught Mia's camera lens, its red dot blinking like a faint pulse of hope in the storm. "This ain't right," a vendor shouted from his taco cart, his fist raised, his apron stained with salsa, his voice carrying over the growing din. Jamal drew a deep breath, his voice piercing the swelling chaos like a beacon through fog. "This isn't over," he said, the words loud, deliberate, a vow meant for the crowd to carry, to hold tight in their hearts, to spread beyond this street. The cruiser's door slammed shut with a hollow clang, the siren's wail swallowing the street's fury, leaving a stunned, simmering silence in its wake, the crowd's anger coiling like a spring, ready to snap. The police station stood like a concrete fortress at the edge of 7th Street, its walls cold and unyielding, its fluorescent lights bleaching the air of warmth, casting harsh shadows that seemed to cling to every surface. The corridors hummed with the relentless buzz of routine, radios crackling with static, keyboards clacking in uneven bursts, officers trading half-hearted jabs over stale donuts and lukewarm coffee from a machine that groaned with every use. The air reeked of antiseptic, burnt grounds, and something sourer, like despair baked into the scuffed tiles, a residue of too many lives caught in the system's gears. Jamal, his wrists still cuffed, the metal digging into his skin, was marched through the booking area, Malone and Harris bracketing him like sentries guarding a trophy they weren't sure they'd earned. Heads turned, not every suspect arrived in a tailored suit, radiating a calm that seemed to unsettle the room's rhythm, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the officers' glances. At the booking desk, a weary officer with bags under his eyes and a name tag reading Sergeant Torres glanced up, his fingers poised over a grimy keyboard, his voice flat from years of monotony. "Name?" he grunted, barely lifting his gaze from the screen. "Jamal Carter," Malone snapped before Jamal could open his mouth, his voice clipped, impatient, as if the question itself was a waste of his time. The officer typed, his brow furrowing slightly as the screen flickered, a glitch or a flag he didn't voice, his lips tightening briefly before he waved them toward the fingerprinting station without comment. The scanner's hum was a clinical drone as Jamal's fingers pressed against the glass, leaving faint smudges that glowed under the machine's cold light. Jamal stood silent, his mind a war room, mapping strategies, weighing risks, anticipating traps that could turn a bad morning into a lost life. He'd spent years in rooms like this, arguing motions, freeing clients from these very cells, dismantling lies with evidence and will, but now he was the one chained, the system's weight pressing down like a vice, threatening to crush what he'd built. He focused on breathing, slow and deep, keeping his mind sharp, knowing every glance, every word, could be twisted into a noose by hands eager to tighten it. They shoved him into a holding cell, a claustrophobic box with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a rusted toilet in the corner, its stench clinging to the air like a curse, mingling with the faint tang of mildew. The walls were scrawled with faded graffiti, names, curses, pleas scratched with broken pens or desperate fingernails, etched by hands long gone, their stories lost to the station's grind. Malone uncuffed him, the metal scraping his wrists raw, and sneered through the bars, his pale eyes glinting with a mix of contempt and unease. "Get comfy, lawyer. You're here a while." Jamal sat, his spine straight, his gaze locked forward, refusing to take the bait, his silence a shield stronger than any retort. Harris lingered, his bulk filling the doorway, his voice a low mutter, almost to himself. "Really a lawyer?" Malone scoffed, turning away, his boots scuffing the floor. "Just another mouth in a suit. They all talk big, don't mean shit." But doubt crept in elsewhere, a whisper that refused to stay silent, burrowing into the station's cracks. Officer Clara Nguyen, a rookie with a year's grit and a mind like a steel trap, had caught Jamal's name during the booking chaos, a spark that nagged at her memory, pulling at a thread she couldn't ignore. It tugged her back to law school, to an article dog-eared in her dorm, Carter vs. Ohio, a case that gutted a corrupt sheriff's department, winning millions for families torn apart by wrongful convictions, a victory that made her believe justice wasn't just a word. On her break, she slipped into the precinct stairwell, the concrete walls muffling the station's buzz, and pulled up a legal journal on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as the screen loaded. Her breath caught at the profile: Jamal Carter, civil rights crusader, redefines justice. The photo was unmistakable, same steady eyes, same quiet strength that had unnerved Malone in the booking room, a man who'd faced giants and left them humbled. Carter wasn't just a lawyer, he was a titan, his name in headlines from Cleveland to Capitol Hill, his cases forcing resignations, rewriting laws, shining light into shadows where power hid. Her pulse raced. This was no small-time arrest, no random stop gone wrong. This was a landmine, and they were all standing on it. She found Malone in the break room, stirring sugar into his coffee with a plastic spoon, his mug trembling faintly in his grip, betraying the bravado in his smirk. "That guy you brought in, Jamal Carter," Clara said, keeping her voice low, her eyes darting to the door to ensure no one lingered nearby. "He's not just a lawyer. He's huge: civil rights, national news, lawsuits that take down entire departments. This could burn us all if we don't handle it right." Malone laughed, but it was brittle, cracking at the edges, his knuckles widening around the mug as he tried to shrug it off. "You believe every perp with a story, Nguyen?" "Green as hell," he shot back, his voice too loud, too defensive, echoing in the empty room. Clara pressed on, undeterred, her rookie badge gleaming under the fluorescent hum, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Check his name, Malone. I'm telling you, this isn't a game. We're exposed, and it's going to blow up." He waved her off, muttering about rookies with big heads and no sense, but her words clung to him like damp rot, a splinter he couldn't dig out, gnawing at the edges of his certainty. Captain Elena Vasquez, 42, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun that spoke of discipline forged in fire, was 3 weeks into her tenure at the precinct, her reputation for integrity both a beacon and a target in a city riddled with political quicksand. She'd left a small-town department in New Mexico, where trust was earned over diner coffee and long talks, for this urban maze, chasing a chance to make a dent in a system she knew was broken. But the city tested her daily, its shadows hiding knives, its alliances shifting like sand. When Clara slipped her a note during a rushed coffee run, scrawled on a napkin, "Carter's trouble. Big trouble. Check him now." Vasquez's gut churned, a warning honed by years of sniffing out lies, of sensing storms before they broke. She found Malone and Harris in the bullpen, their reports half finished on flickering monitors, their faces pale, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the air conditioning's drone, their eyes darting like men who'd stepped into a trap they couldn't see. "Tell me about this morning's arrest," Vasquez said, her voice low, her dark eyes pinning them like specimens under glass, her stance unyielding, a general assessing troops who'd faltered. Malone straightened, his tone too smooth, practiced, like a salesman hiding a cracked product, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "Jamal Carter, ma'am. Resisting arrest. Acted suspicious, wouldn't comply with orders." Harris nodded, but his eyes dropped to the floor, his fingers twitching, betraying the lie before his lips could seal it. Vasquez leaned forward slightly, her gaze boring into them, a hunter sensing blood in the air. "Suspicious how? Be specific. I want details, not stories." Malone faltered, his story fraying like cheap thread, a vague call about loitering, a description too broad to mean anything, male, black, near 7th Street, could have been anyone, meant nothing. The details dissolved under her scrutiny, leaving holes she could drive a truck through, gaps that screamed intent, not accident. "I want those reports on my desk in 1 hour, she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument, her boots clicking sharply as she turned on her heel. "And I'm seeing him now." In the holding cell, Jamal sat with his hands clasped, his mind a chessboard, moves, countermoves, traps he couldn't yet see, but felt closing in. His shoulder throbbed where Malone's twist had bitten deep, a bruise blooming under his shirt, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the bigger game. This wasn't random, it felt orchestrated, a play drawn from a deeper well, like the case last year where a judge tried to bury evidence of tampered arrests, only for Jamal to dig it up and burn the lies to ash. He'd faced setups before, corporate smears, doctored files, whispers that his wins were lucky, but this hit different, a blade aimed at the heart of his life's work, at the families he'd sworn to protect, the communities he'd promised to lift. When Vasquez appeared, her presence filled the cramped space like a storm front, her dark eyes assessing him with a mix of caution and something else, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a fight she knew too well. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice measured, warm but firm, like a hand extended but ready to pull back if tested. "I need your side. Tell me what happened." Jamal studied her, searching for cracks, for signs of complicity or truth, his years in courtrooms teaching him to read faces, jurors, judges, liars. Vasquez felt like someone caught between duty and doubt, a woman fighting her own war. "I was walking to my car after breakfast at Mama Rosa's," he began, his voice steady, each word a brick laid with care, building a wall of truth no one could topple. "Officers Malone and Harris stopped me, demanded my ID. I complied, handed it over, asked why I was being stopped. They didn't like the question, didn't answer. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground, my arm twisted, cuffed, accused of resisting. I didn't resist, Captain. I know better than to give them an excuse to escalate." His eyes held hers, unflinching, a challenge wrapped in calm, daring her to see the lie in Malone's story, not his, to feel the weight of what was done. Vasquez listened, her face unreadable, but her mind catalogued every detail, every inflection, cross-referencing it with the holes in Malone's flimsy tale. She'd seen resisting weaponized too often, black men, brown men, anyone who dared ask why, a catch-all to justify force, to silence questions, to bury truth under paperwork and procedure. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tight with something unspoken, her boots echoing as she stepped out, the cell door clanging shut behind her with a finality that lingered. Back at her desk, she dove into Jamal's world, pulling up court records, news clippings, and a state task force report buried behind a restricted firewall, accessible only with her new clearance, a privilege she hadn't yet tested. The truth hit like a freight train, slamming into her with a force that stole her breath. Jamal Carter was a linchpin in a state-led investigation into systemic bias in law enforcement, targeting precincts like hers for racial profiling, bribery, evidence tampering, sins whispered in locker rooms but never named aloud, sins she'd suspected but hadn't rooted out. His cases had forced resignations of chiefs, freed innocents from decades in cages, drawn federal scrutiny to departments that thought themselves untouchable. Worse, a leaked memo, traced to her precinct server, a digital fingerprint she couldn't ignore, named him a threat, urged his neutralization through discredit or detention, a cold directive to silence him before his probe could burn their house down. Someone wanted him gone, and Malone and Harris were the pawns, witting or not, in a game far bigger than a morning stop. By midday, the station crackled with tension, a live wire sparking in a room full of gasoline. Outside, Mia's video had exploded online, surging past 150,000 views, shared by activists with megaphones, musicians with millions of followers, even a senator with a knack for riding waves of outrage. A crowd, 500 strong now, spilling onto crosswalks, blocking traffic, choked 7th Street, clutching signs scrawled with "Justice for Jamal" and "No More Lies," their edges curling in the morning's damp air. Aisha Reed, Jamal's law partner, stood at the forefront, her braids swinging as she rallied the group with a megaphone, her voice a storm breaking over the precinct's concrete walls. "This stops today," she roared, her words igniting cheers, fists pumping in rhythm, a tide of defiance rising. News vans swarmed, their cameras rolling, capturing every tear-streaked face, every raised sign, the lenses glinting like vultures circling a wound. Mrs. Lena Brooks waved a placard from her wheelchair, her grandson pushing her forward through the crowd, his jaw set with a fury that belied his 15 years, his eyes burning with the weight of stories Lena had told him, stops, searches, brothers lost. The chants grew louder, rhythmic, relentless, shaking the station's windows like a drumbeat of reckoning. "Free Jamal! Free Jamal!" Inside, Vasquez felt the tremor, a quake building beneath her feet, threatening to crack the precinct's foundation, to bring the walls crashing down. The air was thick with the weight of what was coming, the station's usual buzz drowned by the crowd's roar filtering through the glass, a living force pressing against her chest. She dialed Lila Chen, a state prosecutor she'd known since their academy days in Albuquerque, whose bluntness cut through bullshit like a blade through silk, a woman who'd never minced words or dodged a fight. "Elena, you're in deep shit," Lila said, her voice clipped, urgent, the sound of someone pacing a war room with no time to waste. "Carter's untouchable, he's state-protected, tied to the governor's task force, with a direct line to federal oversight, the kind that makes careers end. That memo came from your server, Elena. Someone's playing dirty, and they played you like a damn fiddle. Fix this now, or your precinct's front-page carnage by tonight, and not the kind you walk away from." Vasquez gripped the phone, her knuckles widening, her jaw clenched so tight it ached, her heart pounding as the scope of the disaster sank in. She hauled Malone and Harris into her office, their bravado gone, their faces pale, sweat beading on their foreheads like men who'd stepped into a trap and felt the jaws closing. "You arrested a state asset," Vasquez hissed, her fury barely leashed, a storm trapped in her 5'6" frame, her dark eyes blazing with a fire that made Malone flinch. "This wasn't a random stop, it was a setup, and you walked right into it. Who tipped you off? I want names, now." Malone stammered, his voice cracking, claiming a vague call, a routine check gone wrong, but his eyes darted like a trapped rat's, searching for an out that didn't exist. Harris broke under her glare, his voice a hoarse whisper, guilt seeping through the cracks like water through a failing dam. "It was a note, ma'am. Anonymous. Left in our locker this morning. Said to watch for a guy like him, said he was stirring trouble, dangerous, needed handling." Vasquez's eyes narrowed to slits, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, each word a bullet. "Trouble? You mean a black man in a suit, breathing, existing? Where's that note? I want it on my desk, and I want it yesterday." She spun to Clara, who'd hovered nearby, her face taut with worry, her rookie badge catching the light like a beacon of hope in the storm. "Find that memo in evidence," Vasquez ordered, her voice low, urgent, cutting through the station's buzz like a knife. "Keep it off the radar. No leaks, Clara. We can't afford them." In his cell, Jamal sat on the metal bench, his hands folded, his mind racing despite the ache in his shoulder, the bruise blooming where Harris's knee had pressed, the raw sting of cuffs still burning his wrists. The chants outside were a lifeline, a tide of support pulling him above the cell's despair, keeping him from sinking into the fear that clawed at the edges of his resolve. He'd faced traps before, corporate smears, doctored evidence, whispers that his wins were lucky or flukes, but this was different, personal, a dagger aimed at the heart of his work, at the families he'd sworn to protect, the communities he'd promised to lift from the shadows. Aisha would be out there, he knew, her fire rallying the crowd, her phone burning with calls to their firm's allies, judges, reporters, senators, anyone who could pull a lever and shift the game. He thought of Nia, her text about the barbecue, her laugh that could light a room, and his father, long gone, whose voice still guided him, "Stay sharp, son. They'll come for you, but you're stronger." The memory steadied him, a rock in the storm. When Vasquez returned, her expression was grim but resolute, her shoulders squared like a soldier facing a long march, her dark eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Carter, this was a mistake, a deliberate one," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of what she'd uncovered, each word measured but heavy with truth. "You're free to go, but I need your help to root this out, to clean up my house before it burns us all." She paused, her gaze meeting his, an unspoken question hanging between them, "Will you trust me?" Jamal stood slowly, his gaze piercing, searching her for deception, for weakness, finding neither, only a woman fighting her own war against a system she'd inherited but didn't build. "This isn't just about me, Captain," he said, his voice firm, a vow etched in steel, tempered by years of battles won and lost. "It's about every kid stopped for walking home, every mother praying her son makes it through the night, every person this system chews up and spits out. If you're serious about cleaning your house, I'm in, but it's got to be real change, not promises that fade by next week, not headlines that mean nothing when the cameras leave." Vasquez nodded, a spark of respect flaring in her eyes, a bridge forming between them, fragile but real, built on a shared need to make things right. "I'm serious, Carter," she said, her voice steady, a commitment sealed. "Let's do this." They walked to the station's entrance, the crowd's roar shaking the glass doors, a living force pressing against the precinct's walls, a tide of voices demanding to be heard. Vasquez handed Jamal his phone, its screen cracked but glowing, a lifeline to the world beyond the cell, to the fight waiting outside. "They're waiting for you," she said, her voice soft but steady, a general sending a soldier to the front, knowing the battle was just beginning. Jamal stepped outside, and the cheers crashed over him like a wave, nearly knocking him back, a tide of sound and light that filled his chest, swelling his heart with a mix of relief and resolve. Aisha rushed forward, her hug fierce, her breath hot against his ear as she whispered, "Don't you dare scare me like that again, Jamal, you hear me? Her eyes were wet with relief, with rage, with love, her braids brushing his cheek as she held him tight. He squeezed her back, his smile a flicker of warmth in the storm, a promise that he was still here, still fighting. Then he turned to face the crowd, raising a hand for silence, his presence commanding every eye, every lens, every heart in the swelling sea of faces. "This isn't about one arrest," he said, his voice ringing clear, cutting through the chaos like a bell, each word a stone laid in a foundation of truth, building something unbreakable. "It's about a system that targets us for our skin, our voice, our existence, that sees threat where there's only life. Apologies aren't enough, we need action. New policies, real accountability, a way to protect, not punish, to lift, not break." The crowd erupted, cheers swallowing his words, signs thrusting skyward like banners of war. Justice now, no more lies scrawled in red paint, in black marker, in hope that bled through every letter. Aisha gripped his arm, her pride warring with caution. She'd seen too many movements spark and fade, too many promises dissolve under bureaucracy's weight, but in this moment, she believed, her eyes shining with a fire that matched his own. Mia, still filming from the crowd's edge, zoomed in, her hands steadier now, her post caption raw and blazing, "This is our fight now." #Jamal Carter. Inside, Vasquez watched from the doorway, her mind racing, a general mapping a battlefield strewn with mines, her heart heavy with the fight ahead. The memo's source, a deputy chief named Hargrove, whispered to be untouchable, a ghost in the precinct's shadows, remained at large, their influence a blade poised to strike, to unravel everything she was fighting to build, everything Jamal was risking his life to change. She turned to Clara, her voice low, urgent, cutting through the station's buzz like a knife through fog. "We start tonight," she said, her eyes burning with a resolve that felt like fire. "Full audit, every file, every officer, every whisper. No one skates free, Clara. Not on my watch." The next 6 months were a crucible, forging change in fire and resistance, a battle fought on streets, in code, in hearts. Jamal and Aisha launched the People's Equity Project, a coalition born from the ashes of that morning's injustice, its roots sunk deep in the community's pain, its branches reaching for a justice that didn't just speak but acted. They didn't build dusty legal clinics with endless wait lists. Instead, they created EquiLink, a mobile app linking marginalized communities to pro bono lawyers, mental health counselors, and job training programs, a lifeline in a world that too often left them drowning in silence. Nia, Jamal's sister, poured her tech genius into the app's design, her nights fueled by energy drinks and a stubborn determination, her braids swinging as she coded in a cramped apartment lit by a single flickering lamp, her laptop humming with purpose. "This is for us," she said at the launch, her voice fierce, her eyes shining with a purpose that felt like a vow, a promise to every kid she'd grown up with, every neighbor who'd been left behind. No one gets forgotten, not anymore. EquiLink's interface, bold reds and golds, intuitive as a friend's voice, with buttons that felt like handshakes, hit 10,000 downloads in its first 3 weeks, a quiet revolution spreading block by block, phone by phone, life by life. Vasquez, meanwhile, dragged the precinct into uncharted territory, her will a hammer against a wall of inertia, her nights haunted by doubts she buried under resolve. She mandated body cameras with real-time oversight, catching infractions before they could fester, slurs muttered under breath, shoves disguised as control, lies that once hid in shadows now flagged instantly, alerts pinging to her desk like warning bells. Instead of lecture halls filled with bored cops doodling in notebooks, she pioneered trust walks, where officers and residents patrolled side by side, sharing stories over bodega coffee or dusklit corners, the city's pulse softening their steps, turning strangers into neighbors. Clara, now a community liaison, thrived in these moments, her empathy disarming even the wariest residents, her laugh a bridge where distrust once stood like a barricade. "This is my block too," she'd say, her rookie badge gleaming, her smile cracking open doors that had long been bolted shut, her hands steady as she handed out her card to kids who eyed her warily. But resistance festered like rot in an old wound, seeping into the city's cracks, threatening to choke the roots of change. Sergeant Daniels, a grizzled veteran with 30 years and ties to the precinct's old guard, leaked Vasquez's reform plans to a tabloid, painting her as a traitor who'd got the force for headlines, a sellout bending to woke pressure. Graffiti bloomed on the station's walls overnight: "Sellout, weak, go back home," spray-painted in jagged letters that dripped like blood, a warning from those who saw change as betrayal, who clung to power like a lifeline. Whispers of a walkout stirred in the locker room, a rebellion brewing among cops who muttered that Vasquez was too soft, too new, too outsider to understand their world. She held firm, suspending Daniels pending a full investigation, her voice steady on the precinct's intercom as she announced it to a room of stone-faced officers, but the damage lingered, distrust seeping into the city's veins like poison, turning neighbors against her, against each other. Vasquez sat alone some nights, her office dim, rain streaking the windows, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo, her daughter, 8, smiling at a fair, wondering if she'd lose everything for this fight, if the city would break her before she could mend it. Jamal fought back with voices unheard, a podcast recorded in a makeshift studio above Rose's diner, the smell of frying eggs and brewing coffee drifting through the mic, grounding the stories in the city's heartbeat. One episode featured Mrs. Lena Brooks, her gravelly voice recounting decades of stops, searches, and silence, her words raw and unyielding, cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm tired, Lord, so tired, but I'm still here, fighting for my babies, for all our babies." The episode hit 1 million downloads in a week, cracking the city's heart open, forcing it to listen, to feel the weight of her years, her pain, her defiance. Listeners called in, their voices trembling, mothers, sons, workers, sharing their own stories, weaving a tapestry of truth that the city couldn't ignore, a chorus that drowned out the tabloid's lies. Nia's youth hackathons lit up school gyms across the city, transforming concrete boxes into hubs of creation where teens coded apps for civic change, trackers for police stops, alerts for community aid, platforms for truth to breathe free, unchained from fear. At one event, held in a gym smelling of sweat and hope, Javier, a lanky 16-year-old with a stutter that hid his brilliance, pitched a tool for anonymous bias reports, his voice shaking but sure, his eyes fixed on the floor as he spoke. "It's F for my brother," he said, barely audible, his pain a quiet thunder in the room, a wound laid bare. He didn't come home once, got stopped, never came back." Jamal clapped his shoulder, his voice soft, steady, like a hand pulling Javier from the dark. "You're building his legacy, Javier. Keep going, you hear me?" Javier's app won, and his grin lit the gym like a sunrise, a spark of hope in a world too often shadowed, his teammates cheering as he clutched the trophy, his stutter silent in victory. Not every day burned bright with promise. A rookie officer, cocky and untrained, ignored protocol during a jaywalking stop, escalating it into a brawl that left a 17-year-old bloodied, his lip split, his mother sobbing on the precinct steps. The scene was caught on EquiLink's new live-stream feature, the footage raw and damning, spreading faster than wildfire, igniting protests that tore through the city's heart. Tires burned in the streets, the air thick with smoke and rage, the city's wounds torn open anew, bleeding distrust. Vasquez faced the cameras outside the station, her voice cracking on the evening news, her hands trembling at the podium as she owned the failure, her eyes wet but unflinching under the glare of lights. We failed that boy, that family, this city, she said, her words raw, unscripted, cutting through the jeers of the crowd. But we'll fix it, I swear it on everything I am. Some in the crowd jeered louder, throwing bottles that shattered at her feet, but others paused, hearing the break in her voice, the truth of her fight, the weight of a woman who'd staked her life on change. Jamal met her weekly, their talks raw, real, often late in her office, rain streaking the windows, coffee gone cold in chipped mugs. People need proof, Elena, he said one night, his own exhaustion mirroring hers, his shoulders still stiff from that morning's arrest, his eyes tired but fierce with a fire that hadn't dimmed. Show them you're in the trenches, bleeding with them. She nodded, shadows carving her face, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the rain. I'm trying, Jamal. God, I'm trying, but it's heavy. Community meetings became battlegrounds, not of fists but of words, held in church basements and rec centers, the air thick with sweat and hope. Jamal stood at folding tables, Aisha at his side, listening to mothers like Lena, fathers like Marcus, a mechanic whose son was stopped weekly, his toolbox searched for contraband that never existed. We're tired, Marcus said, his voice breaking, his hands calloused from years of labor. When's it change? Jamal met his gaze, unflinching. Now, he said, with us, here, building it together. Aisha passed out flyers for EquiLink, her voice steady, her braids swinging. This app's yours, use it, fight with it. Nia demoed it on a borrowed projector, her fingers flying, showing how to report, connect, heal. The room buzzed, anger, yes, but hope, too, fragile but growing. 6 months to the day, Jamal returned to the precinct, not as a suspect in cuffs, but as a guest at an open house, the station transformed for a fleeting moment into something almost human. Families milled about, kids climbing onto squad cars, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the precinct's usual grim hum, their fingers sticky with cotton candy from a rented machine. Officers offered shy smiles, their badges gleaming under string lights strung across the parking lot, a makeshift attempt at warmth that felt like a truce, tentative but real. Rosa was there, her diner closed early, her apron swapped for a bright yellow dress, her grin wide as she waved at Jamal from the crowd, a thermos of coffee in her hand, her presence a reminder of the street that had held him up. Lena's grandson, Malik, clutched a notebook, his eyes wide with awe, scribbling notes as Jamal approached the mic. Jamal spoke to a mixed group, cops, residents, reporters, Malik's pencil scratching furiously, capturing every word. His voice was a steady current, weaving through the night, binding them together in a moment that felt bigger than the lot, bigger than the city. Justice isn't a badge or a verdict, it's a promise we keep, messy and hard, every single day, he said, his words landing softly, sinking deep, rooting in hearts that had forgotten how to hope. It's ours to build, together, not tomorrow, but now, right here, with every step we take. The crowd nodded, some skeptical, their arms crossed, some tearful, wiping eyes with sleeves, a ripple of hope spreading like light through cracks in stone, fragile but undeniable. Tessa, a young officer with cornrows tucked under her cap, approached him afterward, her boots scuffing the asphalt, her eyes uncertain but bright, like stars breaking through the city's smog. I grew up 3 blocks from here, she said, her voice soft but sure, her hands clasped tight to still their tremble, her badge gleaming faintly in the dusk. Joined to protect my people, not control them, not hurt them. Your words, they reminded me why I'm here, why I stay, even when it's hard. Jamal smiled, seeing Nia's fire in her, a flicker of tomorrow's dawn, a promise of a city that could be. Stay true, Tessa, he said, his voice warm, grounding, a hand extended across a divide. "You're what this city needs, what it's been waiting for." That night, Jamal sat in the Equity Project's office, case files spilling across his desk, their edges curling in the humid air, each one a story, a fight, a life hanging in the balance. Aisha burst through the door, her grin electric, her tablet glowing with news that lit the room brighter than the flickering bulb overhead. "EquiLink hit 10,000 users, Jamal," she said, tossing her braids back, her voice alive with triumph, with defiance. "And the school board, they're rolling out our coding curriculum citywide, starting next month, getting kids like Javier building the future." Jamal exhaled, relief flooding him like sunlight through a storm's end, his chest loosening for the first time in months, his heart swelling with a pride that felt bigger than himself. "You and Nia did that," he said, his voice thick with gratitude, with love for the sister who'd turned pain into code, for the partner who'd stood with him through fire. Aisha shook her head, fierce, unyielding, her eyes locking with his. "We all did, Jamal. You, me, Nia, Rosa, Lena, Malik, even that damn arrest. It woke the city up, made it see what's possible." Outside, stars pierced the night sky, sharp and defiant against the city's glow, their light a reminder of battles won and those yet to come. Jamal stepped onto the sidewalk, pausing to breathe, the air cool against his skin, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt, of life persisting. The shadow of Deputy Chief Hargrove lingered, his name whispered in back rooms, his influence a blade still poised to strike, a threat uncaught, a battle waiting in the wings. But EquiLink was thriving, its red and gold icon glowing on phones across the city, linking lives to hope, to power, to each other. Trust walks were routine now, Clara's laugh a common sound on 7th Street, neighbors nodding to cops they once crossed streets to avoid. Tessa's generation was rising, their voices sharp, their dreams fierce, their badges worn not as crowns but as promises, as vows to a city that could be. Jamal thought of Nia's barbecue, of laughter under string lights, ribs piled high on paper plates, Rosa's voice calling for seconds, Malik reading his poems aloud, his words tentative but growing stronger. He thought of his father, whose lessons had carried him through that cell, through this day, through every fight that tried to break him. Tomorrow held new battles, Hargrove's shadow, new cases piling on his desk, new wounds the city would inflict, but it also held Javier's code, Tessa's resolve, Aisha's fire, Lena's stories, Nia's dreams. Change wasn't a finish line, it was a path, uneven, alive, carved one step at a time, one truth at a time, one promise at a time, each one a flame that refused to die. He walked home, his step steady, his heart full, the bruise on his wrist a reminder of the cost, the crowd's cheers an echo of the prize. The city hummed around him, flawed, fierce, his. He was ready for the fights ahead, for the victories, small and large, that waited on the unyielding path, fueled by a flame that burned brighter than any shadow could hope to quench.